Do you think that to really do right by the land and the biota,
yeah,
that there have to be major changes in our social structure or our economic structure?
probably so. To what extent? Major, of course, is kind of an upward-ended thing. We have
You
to
mentioned material being so materialistic.
Yeah, because I've often thought this, being a realist too. You know, to make, right, oh, this is an interesting point. It deserves mentioning here very strongly. There's a strong effort now within the field of conservation biology. They're getting petitions signed, position statements written on the need to go from a growth economy to a steady state economy. Because we can see, being biologists and realists, that we can't continue forever to have a growth economy. We're going to run out of gas. So this is quite a thing. I've got quite a website on this.
Now, is this through the Society of Conservation
Well,
Biologists?
it started by one guy, a friend of mine from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's got a PhD in economics from University of Arizona, and Brian Czech, just like the guy out of Warsaw, or not Warsaw, Prague. And Brian, he did his dissertation on this and wrote a really good book called Shoveling Fuel for a Runaway Train. And I reviewed this for a journal, and he read it was very favorable. And he got a hold of me. He says, you know, I think we think a lot alike. Since then, we've been in touch a lot. But he's the one that got it going. And there's just because it's such an obvious thing, you know. But okay, I say, okay, this sounds good to us. Here we're sitting here, all pretty much preaching to each other as members of the choir. The next time you're downtown at a magazine or a news rack, pick up a major newspaper, look at the stock quotations in there, and think of thousands of corporations that don't want a steady state economy, that think in terms of short-term profit. Their stockholders think that way. So we've got, and of course these are the guys who elect politicians. So we've got to be realistic about this. We're not going to have everybody jumping on the bandwagon. And the same, think of it from your own perspective. You probably own some stocks. We all have retirement incomes, much of which is invested in the stock market. So this is going to take some really strong leadership. It's not likely to come from Washington. Got to come from the grassroots somehow. But that's... So is
that incorporated into your environmental perspective?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and Brian himself is a member...
Let's pause just for a second. Okay.
Say, if you want that, don't come to Berkeley.
We're back on.
Yeah.
And we were talking about whether you'd incorporated this idea that we have to make major change in how we do business.
Yeah, okay, because this goes into another subject that I've developed. What the heck is the title of this? It's called, something to this effect. Conservation and economic growth. An unacceptable oxymoron, question mark, you know. And I've given this at a number of professional societies, and I use as an example here, which is if the Lord wanted to create a bad example of resource use and values, it's Las Vegas. And so I talk about the growth of Las Vegas, their need for water, and what this does to desert ecosystems, which I work on, arid land ecosystems. And I've got some marvelous graphics and stuff to illustrate this point. And what Las Vegas is doing now, they've applied for water rights several hundred miles north in Nevada to pipe water in an aqueduct to Las Vegas. Las Vegas right now is growing at the rate of 7,000 people per month. 100,000 in a year, 1 million in a decade. And yet they're out of water. Along with the same point, it's a very interesting thing. Hydrologists and hydrographers at Scripps, at UCSD, have predicted with their computer models that inside of 20 years, Lake Mead will no longer serve as a reservoir. You may have read that. And so to increase the population from 2 million, which it is now, to 3 million in 10 years. It's just totally ridiculous. But how do you go to the people that run Las Vegas and the people that come there and say you can't do this anymore? That is a real bunch of hot potatoes there. So I said, this is essentially the problem. Then I talk about Devil's Hole. See, that's what got us going on the Devil's Hole thing, was the extraction of water from that area, which was ultimately destined for Las Vegas. We found this out later in some of the reports that were written. So these...
so it seems like it does require kind of a shake-up in...
well, it does. But how do you...
the system, the capitalist system,
It
perhaps.
does. I've got a book at home written by a guy back at State University of New York called Is Capitalism Sustainable? Very good question. It can't be, not as we know it.
We haven't even mentioned the words global warming.
Okay.
Which is on everybody's lips.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Who's concerned with
Critters.
conservation biology.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
human and non-human.
This has
So
been
what,
widely hit, say, in the Journal of Conservation Biology. You probably read of this being conducted right out of the museum here at Berkeley, the MVZ. Jim Patton, he's taking up for David Grinnell, or Joe Grinnell, back in the early 1900s, made these inventories of critters up through Yosemite. Their distributions or elevations or whatever. Now, Patton's coming along behind him 100 years later and noticing how they're all moving up now to stay cooler.
Moving to higher elevations.
Yeah. And we look at Las Vegas with global warming, that's not going to do their water supply any good at all.
Well, what about looking at your pupfish?
Well, see, this is the whole point.
When you're trying to save endangered species.
Is this an unacceptable oxymoron, economic growth and desert spring preservation? Yeah, it's totally unacceptable. Because we've already had fish go extinct, pupfishes. There's a place just between, say, Death Valley and Las Vegas called Pahrump Valley. P-A-H-R-U-M-P. I don't know if you've been there or heard of it, but it's a bedroom community for Las Vegas. There's no runoff there. They're going entirely on pumped water.
Pumped from the underground.
Yeah. When they started this, Mant Spring, which is the type locality or the major habitat for the Pahrump pool fish, and Patrichthys latos, what was formerly a spring there, the water table is now 40 feet below that. And so this is going to become general throughout the Southwest, as far as little populations. So how do you then take the electorate of the United States who will make these decisions one way or another and tell them the little fish this long is more important than people coming to Las Vegas? That's a tough order. Probably changing our state way of living and values is one of the most difficult things we can think of doing.